So, Jakks Pacific is a massive toy company making toys for practically any popular American franchise you can think of, which also had a game division responsible for making a ton of plug-and-play games. Alongside your regular retro game collections from Namco and Atari, they also had games for franchises such as Spider-Man, X-Men, Scooby-Doo, Star Wars, SpongeBob, you name it. And these plug-and-play consoles were typically pushing between $20 and $30, with the goal of selling to parents that couldn't afford major consoles or just not knowledgeable enough on gaming to know that these things typically had crap on them. That's not to say that these things were always completely trashed. They were mainly pushed in the early 2000s in an era where 3D games were the norm on the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. 2D games were often relegated to the handheld consoles, but there's nothing inherently wrong with 2D games. Tons of the greatest games of all time, from past to present, are 2D games. That said, these were typically significantly underpowered and not given the same amount of attention that a normal console game would receive, even in the early 90s, and so the quality often varied. That leads us to the Dragon Ball Z plug-and-play console released in 2006 by Jakks Pacific. So on YouTube, there's this idea of obscure media, hard to find and interesting objects that people are always curious about, but I wouldn't really classify that as this. This is more of an I don't really care type media. Even in 2024, I wouldn't call this obscure or rare. They're pretty easy and cheap to find on eBay. Its status as a plug-and-play TV game means that a lot of people just don't really care about it though. Weirdly, this was the only American plug-and-play console for an anime license I could find. You'd think with the massive rise in anime in the early 2000s that other brands would have jumped on this. But at this point, Dragon Ball Z in American culture went beyond just being an anime. It really was a movement in the same way that Pokemon was. And I'll be upfront, I didn't actually buy the physical hardware. I'm not a fan of the classic joystick controller layouts. This one in particular looks pretty uncomfortable to play with, and I'm sure the build quality is less than par. And as I said in another video, I'm not really a Dragon Ball collector. I don't feel moved to buy every bit of obscure hardware that exists for Dragon Ball. I've always been more into the actual media behind it, the games, the show, the manga. That said, the design is still pretty cool looking, definitely something that somebody who is interested in collecting obscure pieces for their shelf might buy. This does make me glad that emulation makes playing games like this possible through MAME. These are the types of games that deserve to be preserved the most, even more so than popular Nintendo consoles or, the common games that people play on emulators. Because where Nintendo might port their old games to modern consoles over time, Jakks Pacific is perfectly fine with just never touching this device ever again. So it's very easy for this to become lost media. The game itself is just 3 games that you can swap between: a game called Kamehameha Assault, a game called Buto Retsuden, and Dragon Ball Pinball. So I'll start off with Kamehameha Assault. There's honestly not a lot to talk about this game. It's sort of a Pong clone, which you would think would be easy to knock out of the park with how simple Pong is, especially considering this isn't even the first or second Dragon Ball Pong game to exist. But they added a bunch of elements to this that make it 10 times more chaotic. Essentially, you're trying to bounce an energy blast to each side while trying to steal Vegeta's Dragon Balls or defend your own. And you can also send energy blasts to slow down Vegeta while you're playing, but it just ends with there being way too much going on. And so I didn't find myself having too much fun with this game. Even from a graphical standpoint, it feels like there's a weird clash. The assets don't really feel like they're popping out to me. So I don't want to say I was disappointed because I didn't have high expectations for this in the first place, but yeah, I was disappointed. Then we move on to Buto Retsuden. So this technically is an original fighting game, but I can't tell if it's lifting sprites from another Dragon Ball console game. And it's weird that they called it Buto Retsuden because that's very similar to the Dragon Ball Z Genesis game, Buto Retsuden, and they don't really share any assets. I do have to say though that the sprites themselves look pretty nice. However, the gameplay itself is exactly what you'd expect. It's stiff, doesn't flow right. Why am I even bothering to explain it? There are so many 2D Dragon Ball fighting games, even just on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, that there's really no reason to ever touch this game again. Playing it is painful. There's not much to really say with it. And then we move on to what I would call the hidden gem of this console, Dragon Ball Pinball. This was a weirdly solid game included in here. Like, I actually had a lot of fun playing this game, more than you'd think. Essentially, it's a sort of pinball adventure game where the goal isn't just to hit the ball around and score points. There are bosses and rooms that you can traverse to as you're playing the game. 7 in total, actually, with some unique elements to them. There's a lot of reused animations and attacks and all that. It sort of reminds me of Pokemon Pinball, obviously on a much smaller scale and quality. I am a little bit skewed in this though, because I am playing this on an emulator with a keyboard. Maybe if I was playing with the included joystick, I wouldn't feel the same way about this. But I kind of wish this game existed on an actual game console like the Super Nintendo or the Game Boy Advance. Trust me, I'd much rather play this than that Dragon Ball card game that Infogrames published. But yeah, overall, if there was one thing that I would tell people to get this game for, even for like an emulator, it would be for Dragon Ball Pinball, this one game. So if you're not a pinball fan, you're probably not coming back for Buto Retsuden or Kamehameha Assault. Overall, this wasn't a super amazing device, but like I said, it does have something worth playing on it at the very least. That's something I can't say for every plug-and-play console. I actually do wish more manga and anime properties overseas got plug-and-play games. There's a certain novelty in these special products that in themselves contain the functionality, so not just putting everything on the PlayStation 5 or Xbox One. Bandai would actually release a whole line of anime-related plug-and-play consoles featuring Dragon Ball, One Piece, and Naruto over exclusively in Japan, and eventually I will do some videos on some of these. I actually just recently bought the Dragon Ball Z and One Piece crossover plug-and-play console game, which looks very interesting. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in hearing more about Dragon Ball and gaming, especially on weird devices like this or obscure trivia, like and subscribe for me. It really helps me out. Anyway,